Good evening, how's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Thursday, Yom Hamishi. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house on a Thursday? Nancy in North Carolina, Shandor in the Bronx, Paul is in the house, Bella in Florida, Yehuda in South Carolina, Ryan in Jacksonville, Florida, Bill in mid-Missouri, Melissa in Great Neck, Belle in Texas, Ella's in the house, Aoife in Florida, Marjorie says shalom, Michelle in Kelso, Washington. Welcome everybody. Our daf is page Ayin High. We're gonna start on page 74b at the bottom, but our page today is 75. We are continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 7. This Mishnah held that if a husband is going to present a get to his wife, and he says, "This is your get on condition that you pay me a certain amount of money." Let's say 200 dinars. So if she doesn't pay the money, they're not divorced. She can choose not to pay the money. But the debate that the sages had was, if she does pay the money, from when is the divorce, what is the effective date of the divorce? Is it the date on which she pays the money? Or is it the earlier date when he handed her the get? He didn't say the language, "This is your divorce from now if you pay me money later." He just said, "This is your divorce on condition that you pay me this money." So Rav Huna says it is effective retroactively and the law follows Rav Huna. Rav Yehuda said, no, it only becomes effective when the money is paid and from that time forward. And we've been continuing this discussion. We pick it up at the bottom of 74b. With regard to the redemption of houses in walled cities, so we're going to look at another area of the law where a transaction can be undone if a condition is met, and we're going to compare that to a get that only becomes valid when a condition is met. So the law that we're looking at here is in ancient Israel when the temple was standing. So purchases of land outside of the cities were held for the tribes, right? So the tribes had different areas in the land of Israel. And we've learned that a purchase or sale of land was really a temporary purchase or sale that was only valid until the next Yovel, the next Jubilee, which would happen every 50 years. So you were really selling the use of the land for as many years as remained until that next Jubilee year came around. That's outside the cities, right, in the tribal lands. But in the cities themselves, this is where the Levium lived, right? The Levites. In the cities, there was a different law for the purchase and sale of land, since it wasn't that the Levites had the same kind of right in the land that the other tribes had. Why did they have such a right? Because the Levites were given, they had an entitlement to the tithes of everyone else, because they had to dedicate their lives to the service of God. And the subgroup of the Levites, the Kohanim, the priests, even more so. So what would happen when land, let's say an apartment essentially, right, or a small house, tiny property inside of one of the walled cities was bought or sold, this was a permanent sale. However, there was one condition on that, which was that the seller would have a right to return the money and recover the property that he had sold as long as he returned the money within a year. He had 12 months to return the money and recover his property. After the year expired, then it's a permanent sale. So this is what we're discussing. With regard to the redemption of houses in walled cities, we learned elsewhere in a Mishnah, in Tractate Arachin 31b, that if a house was sold and not redeemed by its owner within 12 months, it remains permanently in the possession of the purchaser. So the Gemara describes this. At first, meaning in the early years, the purchaser would hide for all of the final day of the 12th month so that the house would be confirmed as his, right? And following the law in Leviticus 25, verses 29 and 30, right? Again, this idea that the seller, he had a year to give the money back, and then he would recover his property. But he has to give the money back. So if the purchaser of the property that doesn't want to give up his purchase hides from the seller, then the seller is unable to return the money. And so therefore the seller is going to be unable to recover the money. The purchaser is going to keep the property. You could say, is this illegal? It certainly violates the spirit of the law of redemption of property in walled cities as specified in the Torah. Now, because the purchaser was in hiding, the seller would be unable to redeem the house from him. So, Hillel the elder, right, the famous Hillel, who said that which is hateful to others, do not do yourself. That which is hateful to you, do not do unto others, right? And the rest of the Torah is all commentary on this idea, that Hillel. So Hillel the elder instituted, who he was the sage of the nation, the leading sage of the nation in the late years of the Second Temple period. So Hillel the elder instituted an ordinance whereby the seller may deposit cholesh, his redemption money, in the temple treasury chamber, and then he may break the door of his house and enter and take possession. In other words, the seller has this right to redeem the house, and he's not going to be deprived of that right just because the purchaser is in hiding. So Hillel creates a sort of, I wouldn't say government, right? It's not run by the government, but it's run by the religious authority of the land, right? It's administrated by the temple treasury, which is a place where the seller who wants to return the money to the purchaser and recover his land, there's a place where he can put the money, and the treasury will accept it on behalf of the purchaser who is not to be found, who is currently in hiding, and that's why he's not to be found. So this was you can see how Hillel the elder's decree upkeeps the intent of the Torah law. And when that purchaser wishes, he should come and take his money from the temple, right? Because now that the seller is ready to return the money, even though he can't find the purchaser, he puts it in the temple treasury. And if the purchaser put a new lock on the door of this guy's the former owner's house, now the former owner is the owner again, and he can break in the door, and it's his house again. What's going to happen with the furniture and the other property? The guy who's been living there for a year, obviously he can come and take it. And he can take his money that was deposited in the treasury. But the point is that the seller recovers his house, and the reason we're studying it here is because Hillel created a mechanism by which the seller can give money to a person that does not want to receive it. Now, the right to give it back is specified in the Torah, and that's why Hillel created that decree. But the point is that the seller can give money to that purchaser who doesn't want to receive that money, and there's a device for that. And Rava says, from the ordinance of Hillel, we learn that if one says to his wife, now coming back to the law of divorce, if one says to his wife, this is your get, your bill of divorce, on the condition that you will give me 200 dinars, and she gave him the money with his consent, then she is divorced. And if she gave him the money against his will, then she is not divorced. Doesn't it sound like, well, no, what we learned from Hillel is that you're able to give the money even against the will. So since it's the husband who said, this is your get on condition that you give me 200 dinars, and then the wife says, okay. And then she goes and gets the 200 dinars, and she says, here's the 200 dinars. I'm fulfilling the condition. And he says, no, I don't want to take the money. She says, you made the condition. He says, I changed my mind. She says, take the money. He says, I won't take it. It would seem like, according to the decree of Hillel, that she can force him to take it, just like the purchaser of the property in the walled city was forced to take it. However, maybe Rav is saying no, because the decree of Hillel proves that Hillel had to create a device using the temple treasury as the depository for that money to accept it on behalf of the purchaser. And in the absence of such a legal administrative device, you cannot force somebody to take something that they don't want to take. So let's see. So how does Rava prove that when the husband created the condition but then doesn't want to receive the money, and he won't take the money from the wife, that indeed the divorce is not valid? How does Rava prove that using Hillel's ordinance? Rava proves this from the fact that it was necessary for Hillel to institute a unique ordinance in the case of houses in walled cities, whereby giving against the will of the receiver is considered giving. And this proves by inference that generally, giving against the recipient's will is not considered valid giving, as if it were, then Hillel would not have needed to institute that ordinance. Rav Papa objects to this, and we are on page 75 now. Rav Papa objects to this, and some say it was Rav Shimi Bar Ashi who raises the objection. And perhaps when it was necessary for Hillel to institute an ordinance allowing the seller to repay the money against the will of the purchaser, it was specifically in a case where he gives the money not in the presence of the purchaser, but when he repays him in his presence, whether the recipient was willing or whether it was against his will, it is considered valid giving. Accordingly, one cannot apply Hillel's ordinance to the case of conditional bills of divorce. The wife came up and said, okay, here's the money. She says that to her husband. Now it's a valid get. He says, I'm not taking the money. Now that's different than Hillel's ordinance, which was created to address the purchaser in hiding. Right? The seller who wants to return the money to the purchaser can't find the purchaser. And that's why Hillel said, okay, deposit it in the temple treasury. But here, the wife is able to find the husband and says, here, take the money. He doesn't want to take it, but she found him and she's ready to pay. So the circumstances are different. Maybe we can't learn out from the law of the redeeming the property of the walled city and learn out to apply that law in the case of the conditional get. And there are those who say a different version of this discussion. Rava says, from the ordinance of Hillel, it can be inferred that if one says to his wife, this is your get on the condition that you will give me 200 dinars, and she gave it to him, whether it was with his consent or whether it was against his consent, it is a valid giving, and the divorce has now been finalized. And the case where it was necessary for Hillel to institute his ordinance was when the giving of the money was not in the presence of the purchaser, but if the repayment was in his presence, whether it was with his consent or whether it was against his will, it is considered valid giving. And indeed, that is the law. That is the law. If the husband said, this is your get if you give me 200 dinars, and you can almost imagine she wants a divorce, she wants a divorce, she wants a divorce. She kept saying, we need a divorce, we need to divorce. Finally, he says, fine, you want a divorce? Give me $100,000, huge money. Like she's never going to come up with it. And then she comes up with it. He says, okay, here's your $100,000. And he's like, well, I don't want the $100,000. Well, according to this principle of Rava, she's got the money. He created the condition. She's got him in her presence. Here's the money. Whether he wants to take it or not, they are divorced. But if she can't find the husband to give him the money to fulfill his condition, then it's not going to be a divorce, because in terms of Hillel's decree with the temple treasury, we don't have that same decree for this kind of giving, so she's going to be out of luck in that situation. Rav Papa objects to this, and some say it was Rav Shimi Bar Ashi who raises the objection, and perhaps even in a case where she gives him the money in his presence. If she gives it with his consent, yes, it is valid. If she gives it against his will, no, it is not considered valid giving. And Hillel specifically instituted what was necessary because in the case of a house in a walled city, the purchaser would hide, and therefore the ordinance was necessary there, but in fact, that objection was overridden. New subject. Rabba, excuse me. Rabba Barbarhana. By the way, I'm going to be monitoring questions myself today. I don't think Nina's going to get back in time. because she's dropping off our daughter and her friend at the Taylor Swift concert. And the traffic jam around SoFi Stadium, which is right near LAX. Honey, I hope you make it back before it gets dark. And I hope my daughter and her friend have a really good time. Okay, let's get back to this. Where am I? All right, so Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says in every place where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel taught a halacha in our body of Mishnah, the halacha, the law, is in accordance with his opinion, right? So where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who was the Nasi of his generation, the head of the Sanhedrin, so the law, and he rose to that position because he was the most prominent sage. Right, so in every place where Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel taught a law, in our body of Mishnah, as opposed to the Gemara, the law is in accordance with his opinion, even though it is cited as an individual opinion, except for 3 cases. So if in a Mishnah it says that the law according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is, then that is the law, with 3 exceptions. With 3 exceptions, right? What are they? 1, with regard to the law of a guarantor, which we learn in Bava Basra, if the creditor stipulated that he can collect his debt from either the debtor or the guarantor, according to the rabbis, he can collect from the guarantor's property even if the debtor has available property. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel holds that the creditor can collect the debt only from the debtor, and he was the majority overruled him. And likewise, the law is not like Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel with regard to the case mentioned here concerning the incident that occurred in Sidon, where the husband said, "This is your get on condition that you return my coat to me." And the coat was lost. And so I think it was Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel who says, okay, so he can replace the value of the coat. She can replace the value of the coat, even though the coat is lost, and thereby obtain the divorce. Whereas the rabbi said, not so simple. That case, there were various interpretations of it, but that's the case we're talking about. And the third exception is, and where we don't follow Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, is that the law is not in accordance with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel concerning the dispute with regard to evidence in the final disagreement. We'll learn about that in Tractate Sanhedrin, where the rabbis hold that if one claims that he has no evidence or witnesses prior to a court case, but subsequently brings evidence to court, the judges do not accept it. According to the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, they can accept it. But you can see why that would be unfair, right? Since the other side cannot prepare their case properly if one side lies about what evidence is going to be presented. Okay, and probably Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel went against that ruling because he could say, well, it's not that the judge will accept it every time. If somebody acts, maliciously in withholding evidence, or the fact that he's going to bring evidence, but perhaps it was done by mistake, and the judge can, a judge has greater power under halakhic law, perhaps than a secular common law judge does, and so he could, he could figure out what is the equitable thing to do. But the sages overruled Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel on that. New subject. The sages taught in a baraisa, right? So a baraisa, contemporaneous with the Mishnah, but not as authoritative as the Mishnah. So we often use baraisas to help us understand the ruling in a Mishnah. So the sages taught in a baraisa, if the husband said to his wife, "Behold, this is your get, but the paper on which it is written is still mine," well, then she is not divorced, as he must give her the actual get in order for the divorce to take effect. Since this paper still belongs to him, it is as if he had given her only the writing. So it is not a valid get. But if the husband says to the wife, "Behold, this is your get on the condition that you return the paper to me," then she is divorced. The get belongs entirely to her, and the returning of the paper is only a stipulation that must be fulfilled later. But the question is, well, if she doesn't fulfill, if she doesn't give him the paper, does that mean that the get wasn't a get? They say she should give him the paper back just to ensure that there is no doubt about it. But the ruling is that if he demands the paper back, he says, "This is your get on condition you give me the paper back," and then he hands it to her, They are divorced, and she should hand him the paper back just to remove doubt. And Abaye objects to this answer. Say that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says that it is acceptable to give the value instead of the item itself, like that coat that was missing, when the item is not existing because it is lost. But in a case where the item is in existence, like the coat was missing, that's why Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, okay, give her the value of the coat instead of the coat. But here, where he says this is your get on condition that you give me the paper back. Well, the item is right there, so she should give him the paper back. The problem is then she doesn't have the get. She wants to have the get in her hand. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel might suggest, or the rabbis might suggest, well, okay, he wants the paper back. Give him the value of the paper. That's the same as the coat. But Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel could object, no. We only do that when the item is missing. Here, the get itself is right there. So rather, Abaye said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Baraisa? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says, we require any stipulated condition to be structured as a compound condition, describing both outcomes, meaning that the condition must mention what will happen, both if the condition is fulfilled and if the condition is not fulfilled. And here, the husband did not state what would happen. He didn't say, this is your get on condition that you give me back the paper. And if you do not give me back the paper, then this is not your get. That's the compound condition that needs to be stated. In this case, the husband said only, this is your get on the condition you return the paper to me. He did not specify that it will not be a valid get if she does not return it. Because he didn't make a compound condition, maybe the condition itself is not valid. Rab objects to this explanation. According to Abaye, the reason the get is valid is that the husband did not compound his condition. But if the husband did compound his condition, then it would not be a valid get. So it seems like, according to Rav, what Abaye was saying is that since the husband didn't properly compound the condition, it's as if he made no condition. If he says, this is your get on condition that you return the paper to me, really all he has said is, this is your get. For him to make that condition stick, he would have had to say, this is your get on condition that you give the paper back to me. And if you do not give the paper back to me, then this is not a valid get. Right? Since the guy didn't say that, it's as if he made no condition at all. Right? So that's what Rava is explaining Abaye's point. Right? Rava objects. According to Abaye, the reason that the bill of divorce is valid is that the husband didn't compound the condition, but if he had compounded the condition, then it would not be a valid get. Now, from where do we learn the law of all conditions, right? Conditions that we would place on a get, on a betrothal, on a purchase, on a gift, right? This is your gift if you mow the lawn. This is your car if you pay me $10,000. This is your... right, any kind of condition that is met. So where do we learn the law of conditions in the Torah? From the tribes of Gad and Reuben at the time that the children of Israel were about to enter the promised land. So recall that the tribes of Gad and Reuben, and I think some of Ephraim, I think that's how it was, they were herders, right? They were cattle. They were in the business of livestock, particularly cattle. And the land that they were all sort of, hovering in on the east side of the Jordan River prior to crossing the Jordan and entering the promised land. So the land where, in fact, in our yearly journey through the Torah, that's where we are right now, right? We're in the book of Deuteronomy, which is basically Moses' last sermon. And he's telling the people, sort of recapping their story since they left Egypt and all the laws that were given to them. Last week we reread the Ten Commandments and the Shema. And during this period, these tribes come to Moses and say, listen, this land over here on the east side of the Jordan is perfect for us. We're not going to find land that's better on the other side of the Jordan. So we'd like to stay here. And so Moses says, are you insane? 40 years we've been wandering the desert so that we could enter the promised land, and now you want to just stop on the wrong side of the river and not enter the promised land and join all your fellow Jews, all the fellow tribes as we enter the land? And are you saying that it's because we have to have wars of conquest and you don't want to participate in the wars? You're not going to stand beside your brothers and sisters as we enter the land, but you want to just stay here and drop out, as it were? And they said, no. That's not what we meant at all. This land is very good for us, and it'll be good for the land of Israel to increase its borders, but we don't want a free ride. In fact, we will go in the front of the army that's conquering the land. We'll be the vanguard of that army, and we'll fight alongside our brothers and sisters to rid the land of these child-sacrificing heathens that are there now. And when the conquest is done, then we will come back to this land that we'd like that's good for our livestock and our children, which is the way they put it. Our livestock and our children. So Moses then says to them, if you will come with us and help conquer the land until it's done, then you can make your inheritance on this side of the river in this land that you like. But if you do not come across the river and fight alongside your brothers and sisters until the conquest is done, then this land over here will not be your inheritance. And so from that statement of Moses, we learn how to state valid legal conditions. Number one, we compound it, right? So we say, this is what will happen if you do fulfill the condition, and this is what will happen if you do not fulfill the condition. That's first. Second, you state the positive action first. If you help conquer the land, then you will receive that, right? The matter before the condition. And if you do not help conquer the land, then you will not receive, right? So the matter, what you need to do, serve alongside as we conquer, then the fulfillment of the condition, and finally the positive before the negative. If you do this thing, such and such will result. If you do not do this thing, then such and such will result, as we shall see. Now, from where do we learn the laws of all conditions? They are derived from the condition of the children of Gad and the children of Reuben. Moses stipulated with them that if they fight the battles with the Jewish people in the land of Israel, they will inherit the land of Gilead in the Transjordan, as they requested. But if they do not fight the battles with the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael, they will not inherit that land. You can read about that at Numbers chapter 32. Now, just as there, in the conditions that Moses made, the language of the condition precedes the subsequent action. So the language of the condition precedes the subsequent action. For he first stated the condition, and afterwards he described the result. If they fulfill the condition, and you shall give them the land of Gilead as an inheritance. So too, any condition is valid only when it is stated before the resultant action. Right? If you will do such and such, that's the condition, then the consequence, right? The condition, then the consequence. And this serves to exclude our case here, where the husband stated the resultant action of giving the divorce, right? He should have said, right, if you will, right, about giving the paper, right? So he says, this is your bill of divorce on the condition that you will give me the paper back. But what we learned from Moses, he should have said, if you will give me the paper back, then this is your get. That would be the correct order. The condition, then the consequence. And since he didn't state it properly, that's another reason to say it's as if he made no condition, and it's just, this is your get. So rather, Rava said, the condition does not apply, and the woman is divorced because the action of giving the bill of divorce precedes the condition. Since he didn't say, if you will give me the paper back, then this is your get, but rather he said, this is your get, on condition that you give me the paper back. So he didn't compound it. He stated it in the wrong order. The condition is not valid. Therefore, what results is, this is your get. Now, Rav Ada bar Ahava objects to this explanation. The reason that the bill of divorce is valid is that the action precedes the condition, and the condition does not take effect. But if the condition were to precede the action, then it would not be a valid bill of divorce. Now, from where do we learn all the laws of conditions? They're derived from the conditions of the children of Gad and the children of Reuben. Just as there, it is a condition with regard to one matter, i.e., that they should fight along with the rest of the Jewish people, and the resultant action with regard to another matter, i.e., that they would receive the land of Gilead. So too, every other condition must follow this pattern. And our situation here with the get, where the husband wants the paper back, it is not within those parameters, because the condition and the action are about the same matter, right? Before, with Moses and the tribes of Reuben and Gad, it was, if you will fight alongside your brothers and sisters, then you will receive that land. But here it's, this is your get on condition you give me the paper back. What paper? Of the get, right? So the condition and the matter are joined too closely together. It's a confusion, and it doesn't work properly under the law of conditions. So accordingly, the condition would not be valid even if one were to disregard the concern for the order of the action preceding the condition. So rather, Rav Ada bar Ahava said that this condition is void because the condition and the action are about the same matter, and therefore the bill of divorce is valid even without fulfillment of the condition. Again, the husband's condition was meaningless. He gave the get to his wife, they're divorced. We're on 75b. Rav Ashi said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Baraisa? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe. As Rav Huna says that Rav says, anyone who states a condition, employing the language on the condition, is like one who states the agreement will take effect retroactively from now, even though the condition is fulfilled only later on. We already learned that, right? That's according to Rav Huna. So consequently, the bill of divorce is effective immediately, even if the woman will later be required to return the document itself to him. Now, the question is, well, if it's a valid condition, she's going to have to return it, but even if it requires returning the paper in order for the divorce to take effect, when it does take effect, it'll retroactively take effect from the moment that the husband handed her the get. But we haven't established whether the condition is a valid condition here. Now, with regard to conditions in a get, Shmuel instituted that in a get of a person on his deathbed, the following expression should be written: if I do not die, this will not be a valid get. And if I die, it will be a valid get. Now, there you see the compounding, right? You see the compounding, and you also see the condition. If I do not die, then this is not a valid get. If I die, then this is a valid get. It's compounded, and the condition is stated before the consequence. So this seems like the right way to state this idea that a guy on his deathbed is saying, look, if I die, meaning of this disease, then this is a valid get for you from now, right? That's the key. Because once he dies, she's a widow, not a divorcee, and he wants to make her a divorcee to protect her from having a yibum obligation to his brother if the guy has no children, and maybe that brother is out of the country and who knows when he'll come back, and the woman could be stranded. Now, the Gemara asks about the wording used here, but let us say this statement in a more intuitive order. Maybe we should say, if I die, it is a valid get, and if I do not die, then it is not a valid get. And the Gemara explains the reason we don't say it that way is because a person does not hasten a calamity upon himself. So he doesn't want to start with, if I die. Right? He starts with, if I don't die, it's not a valid get. If I do die, it is a valid get. And it's because he doesn't want to state, the condition being met of his death first. Rav objects to this. I'm sorry. The Gemara asks, why did Shmuel use this phrasing? But let us say the condition using the following formulation: it will not be a valid get if I do not die, and it will be a valid get if I do die. As opposed to, if I don't die, it's not a valid get. Why would we say it's not a valid get if I don't die? Right? Why would we do it that way as opposed to the other? And Rav objects to this explanation. Now, from where do we learn? Why did Shmuel use this phrasing? Let it be, it will not be a valid get if I do not die, and it will be a valid get if I do die. And the Gemara asks, when stipulating a condition, we require the condition to come before the action. But in this formulation, the resulting action that the get is valid would precede the condition if I do not die, right? We want to say the condition first. If I do not die, not a valid get. If I die, valid get. So Gemara objects to this explanation. Rava objects to this explanation. Now, from where do we learn the principles of all conditions? We learn it from the condition of the children of Gad and the children of Reuben in the desert. Just as there, the affirmative precedes the negative, meaning that the positive portion that speaks about what will occur if the condition is fulfilled appears before the negative portions that describe what will exist if the condition is not fulfilled. Now, here, positive doesn't mean a nice outcome that the guy doesn't die. Positive means is what the reason he's creating this get. If I die, then it is a valid get. If I do not die, then it is not a valid get. Positive is the positive action, his death, that would trigger the result, right? That it is a valid get. So you want the positive before the negative, as opposed to if I don't die, it's not a valid get. Now you want to say that first because people don't like to think about their own death, but we just said that the Torah teaches us through Reuben and Gad's children that you have to state, well, if the condition is met, then what will happen, before you say, if the condition is not met, what will happen. So too, all conditions must be formulated in this manner, and this serves to exclude our case here, where the husband said, well, with the death, as I just said. So rather, Rava said that the condition in the get of a dying man should be worded in the following way, where it's not just compounded, it's tripled. If I do not die, this will not be a get. If I die, this will be a get. If I do not die, this will not be a get. Right? You're repeating the first and third are the same, but in this way, you state the positive before the negative in terms of the proper legal language, and that first use of if I do not die, it's not a get. That's just, for the nicety of not talking about somebody's death before you talk about them surviving. So rather, so the Gemara explains the necessity for such a formulation. The husband first says, if I do not die, this will not be a get, because a person does not hasten a calamity upon himself. Therefore, he first mentions the possibility that he will not die. Then he states the compound condition in the following order. If I die, this is your get. If I do not die, this will not be your get. And this is to satisfy the law of conditions that we state if the condition is met before stating if the condition is not met. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Here's Mishnah number 6. If a husband says to his wife, this is your get on the condition that you will serve my father, or on the condition that you will nurse my son, without specifying a time period, how long is she required to nurse the baby, meaning breastfeed, in order to fulfill the condition? She's required to nurse the baby for 2 years from his birth, which is the length of time generally designated for nursing. Rabbi Yehuda says the time for nursing is only 18 months. If the baby's son died or the husband's father died, this is a valid get, even though the condition was not fulfilled. Remember, the condition was stated without time. If he had said, this is your get on condition that you nurse my son for 6 months, okay, then Jesus had to do 6 months. But if he only said, this is your get on condition you nurse my son, then it's a legal definition that implies 24 months. What about serving the father, right? The husband says, if you continue to serve my father, like to act as a maid for my father, which probably she was doing. Let's say that the father, was living next door or in the apartment upstairs, and she was cooking for the father. This husband doesn't want to divorce her because his father will then lose the person taking care of him, lose his caretaker. So the husband says, look, we can get a divorce, you can be free, you can marry someone else, but only on the condition that you'll continue to be a caretaker for my father, which is what I really need. So it sounds like it's going to be 2 years for taking care of the father as well. But let's hold off on that. The Mishnah continues, but if the husband said to his wife, this is your get on the condition that you will serve my father for 2 years, Or on the condition that you will nurse my son for 2 years. Okay, specified the time. And the son died before she nursed him for 2 years. Or the father said, I do not want you to serve me. Then, even if the father did not say this in anger, and she did everything she was expected to do, it is not a valid get because the condition was not fulfilled. Now, that's a little harsh. That is the law, but there's more nuance to it, as we'll see in the Gemara. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, in a case like this, it is a valid get. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel stated a principle. If there is a hindrance to the fulfillment of the condition that does not result from her, then it is a valid get. Now, we just learned earlier that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is always right? In disputes with other people, except in 3 cases. And this was not one of the 3 cases. But it appears that he is wrong in this case as well. Now, maybe it's not because he's wrong, but because they understood his ruling differently. Let's see. Here's the Gemara. But do we require that she serve the father or nurse the son for all of this time that was stipulated? And the Gemara raises a contradiction based on what was taught in a Baraisa. If she served the father for 1 day, or she nursed the son for 1 day, it is a valid get. I thought she had to do 2 years. And Rav Chisda explains, this is not difficult. This Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And this Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of Shimon ben Gamliel, who disagreed in the previous Mishnah with regard to the coat that was lost. So it's the same matter. According to the opinion of the rabbis there, if there is no possibility that the wife can fulfill the condition by returning the coat as it was lost, the get is not valid. That's what it is. She can't right. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel allows her to substitute the value of the coat. The rabbi said, if he said, this is your get on condition you return the coat, and the coat is lost, no get. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, the husband said, this is your get on condition that you return the coat to me, and the coat is lost, she can replace the value of the coat with money and get the divorce that she wants. And the Gemara explains. The Mishnah, this Mishnah, number 6, is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who claims that the wife can give the husband the equivalent of the stipulated item to render the get valid, as the primary factor is his receiving the benefit that he intended when stating his condition. Therefore, she must nurse the child for the standard length of time, as that is the benefit that he intended when stating his condition, or else the get is not valid. And the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who hold that the wife must fulfill the literal terms of the condition. If she nurses the baby for even 1 day, not the latter part of the Mishnah where it says, the husband says, nurse my child for 2 years or serve my father for 2 years. But the initial part, the first part of the Mishnah, which said, if the husband says, if you will nurse my child, this is your get if you will nurse my child, or this is your get if you will serve my father, with no time period specified, the rabbis say, okay, well, what he meant was the normal amount of time, 2 years. But what you can say is, no, what the guy literally said was, if you will serve, or if you will nurse. If she did that even for 1 day, then she fulfilled the condition, she gets the divorce. So the Gemara challenges, is this explanation possible? But from the fact that the latter clause of our Mishnah is attributed to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, it can be derived by inference that the first clause is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Rather, the Baraisa is in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who is lenient with regard to a condition that you can substitute value, and he interpreted so that it can be fulfilled. And our Mishnah is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis, who are stringent and interpret the condition in an expanded manner. Rava offered an alternative explanation and said that the apparent contradiction is not difficult. Here in the Mishnah, where the husband spoke without specification, this is your get if you will nurse my child, or if you will serve my father, without saying for how long. Here in the Mishnah, where the husband spoke without specification and did not set a time, the sages assigned what they understand to be the standard time for the stipulated action. But in our Baraisa, it is referring to where the husband said explicitly that she should perform the action for only 1 day. The husband said, if you will nurse for a day, or if you will serve my father for a day, then the condition obviously has been met, but it seems like an odd thing for a husband to say, if you will nurse for one day, if you'll serve for one day. Rav Ashi offered a different explanation and said any unspecified statement is also considered to be as though he explicitly said one day. So if he doesn't specify the time, we don't impute to that statement 2 years or some other arbitrary length that we think is the standard. Rather, we just make the minimum measure. And so if he said, if you will serve my father, or if you will nurse, okay, what's the minimum amount of time? 1 day. So if she does it for 1 day, she fulfilled the condition. That's according to Rav Ashi. The Gemara challenges Rav Ashi. We learned in the Mishnah how long is she required to nurse him in order to fulfill the condition? 2 years. Rabbi Yehuda says 18 months. Now granted, according to the opinion of Rava, it works out well. If the husband does not specify the length of time, the wife must nurse the baby for the generally accepted time of 2 years or 18 months according to Rabbi Yehuda. But according to the opinion of Rav Ashi, why do I need her to nurse the baby for 2 years? Or why do I need her to nurse him for 18 months? 1 day would suffice. And the Gemara answers, this is what the Mishnah is saying according to the opinion of Rav Ashi. How long is the wife required to nurse the baby? 1 day from within 2 years of the baby's birth. She only has to do 1 day, and it has to happen within 2 years of the baby's birth. To exclude the case where the 1 day that she nursed him occurred after he was 2 years old, in which case the husband's condition would not be fulfilled. For that is the accepted length of time for a mother to nurse a baby. Or, according to Rabbi Yehuda, 1 day from within the 18 months of the baby's birth. Within 18 months of the birth. To exclude the case where the 1 day that she nursed him occurred after 18 months of, the baby was after more than 18 months old. And the Gemara raises an objection to the opinion of Rav Ashi from the latter clause of our Mishnah. The husband said to his wife, this is your get on the condition you will serve my father for 2 years. Or, this is your get on the condition that you will nurse my son for 2 years. And the son died, or the father said, I do not wish you to serve me. Then even though the father did not say this in anger, it is not a valid get because she didn't do anything wrong, but she was precluded from fulfilling the condition, either because the child or the father died or because the father declined to be served by her, so she didn't fulfill the condition. Now, granted, according to the opinion of Rava, Granted, according to the opinion of Rava, we're at the top of 76a. I'm really close to done. I'm really close to done. So, granted, according to the opinion of Rava, the first clause in the Mishnah is speaking about when the husband did not explicitly mention a period of time. And the latter clause is referring to when he did explicitly mention a period of 2 years. But according to the opinion of Rav Ashi, who holds that when the husband does not mention a period of time, the wife can fulfill her obligation by performing the action for even a single day, it is necessary to explain that the first clause in the Mishnah is referring to when she did fulfill the condition for even 1 day. And therefore, what is different in the first clause and what is different in the latter clause? The Gemara states, according to Rav Ashi's opinion, this is difficult. So we'll work out how this Mishnah actually operates when we resume tomorrow at noon, the regular Friday time, noon Pacific. Okay, Nina's not here. She's dropping off our daughter at the Taylor Swift show. So I need to scan questions or comments myself, which is not easy. Give me a second. Says Bill, while I understand your reluctance, there's definitely a difference of kind as well as degree between the temple administration and the modern state. But as a political theologian, says Bill, your assertion that a court order backed by a public institution isn't a government action caused my eyebrows to climb all the way into my hairline. So I said earlier that depositing money in the temple treasury is not like a court order, or not, I can't quite recapture the flow of where I was at the beginning of the hour. I'm going to let that one go. Okay. Commenting on the traffic near LAX where the concert is. Yes. Sharon, can she keep the get and give him a different but comparable piece of paper? Now, that would seem to be the result according to Reuben Shimon ben Gamliel. Right? The husband said, this is your get on condition you give me the paper back. Now, she wants to keep the get to have evidence that she's divorced. If it only becomes a divorce when she gives it back to him, then did she really receive it? Well, since it wasn't a properly worded condition, that's kind of the sages got around this problem and say it wasn't a properly worded condition. So when he gave it to her, done, they were divorced. Just to remove all doubt, she should give him something back. And it sounds like maybe even the rabbis there would say, yeah, the value of the paper or a different paper. Because there's no way that she can lift the writing off the paper and give him the paper back. I suppose you could say she could make some kind of impression and get it off in reverse and then re-reverse. That's why the sages are obviously very uncomfortable with this. I think this more falls in that realm of we're really trying to understand the law by asking a hypothetical that would, how would this come up? What husband is going to say, this is your get on condition you give me the paper back? I mean, that's not really going to happen. But it's an important question to ask so that we can illuminate, right? Explain that the condition can't refer to itself. That was the problem, right? The condition on the get referred to the get itself. So the other kinds of conditions would have been more proper, right? This is your get on condition that you give me 200 dinars. And really it should have been, if you give me 200 dinars, this is your get. And if you do not give me 200 dinars, this is not your get. That would have been properly worded according to the law that we learn in the Torah from the tribes of Gad and Reuben. Right, then Sharon is also commenting, right, when they said this, the tribes said, this land is good for us, and we will, build pens here to protect our livestock and our women and children. And then Moses later said, okay, if you will do this thing of building pens here to protect your children, your families, and your livestock, Moses reversed that, right? And you will accompany us in the conquest, then this will become your land. But if you do not accompany us in the conquest, then this will not become your land. But this other aspect of it, that these people were more concerned with their livestock, and that's why, right, they were more concerned with their livestock than finally entering the promised land. I mean, they did not have their priorities right. But they did fight alongside their brothers and sisters in the vanguard, and then they received that land. And presumably that was part of the northern kingdom that was wiped out even during the first temple period. Jonathan, if there were another condition on giving the paper back, would it be a paperback writer? Very good. Joe, doesn't she need to keep the proof that she is legally divorced and any future children aren't momsers? Now, remember that what really establishes the divorce is not the paper in her hand, it's the witnesses. The reason she wants that paper is in case the witnesses disappear, somebody challenges the divorce later, and for sure she wants to keep it, right? In fact, we even established that a minor, if she was betrothed by her father, cannot be divorced even if the father's dead unless she's old enough to understand that she needs to keep that paper. Right? If she's too young to understand the value of holding on to a legal document, then she can't receive that legal document. So, of course, we want her to be able to keep that legal document. And it's a weird hypothetical to get into. And ultimately, I think we've established pretty clearly that it doesn't work as if a husband said that. Okay, and then was there something on the YouTube side? Exactly. Michelle is saying, isn't that when the get reaches the hands of the wife that it is that moment that it becomes valid, given that it's all correctly signed and witnessed? Exactly. You understood that. And Michelle, I wonder in most cases, wouldn't it be better for a woman to be a widow rather than a divorce in those times, being better to be known as a widow. Right, and the reason that you might prefer to be a divorcee is if the husband didn't have children and he had a brother and the brother was overseas. Right, because if he had no children and he did have a brother, then the wife has a yibum obligation with that brother when the husband dies. She doesn't have to marry him. They can marry each other, and then their first child becomes the heir of the husband that died. That's the proper thing to do. But if they don't want to marry each other, they don't have to. But they have to perform the chalitza ceremony, which releases them from that levirate bond, that yibum bond. And until they perform that ceremony to release themselves, each other from that bond, she cannot remarry. That's why if that brother is overseas somewhere and they don't know when they're going to be able to perform chalitza, it's much better for her to be a divorcee than to be a widow. It's a specific circumstance, but it's in that circumstance that they would do this situation. This is your get. If I die, if I do not die from this disease, it is not your get. But if I die of this disease, this is your get. But if I don't die of the disease, it's not your get, right? That triple that we stated earlier, that's when you would use it in that situation. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we're together again tomorrow, Friday, at the regular Friday time of noon Pacific. Have a great night.